and that we have kind of all the ideas regarding how to try to analyze essays and letters and whatever, but also including like satirical works in general, because AP exam has given it before in the past. And these are a little trickier because they usually don't have explicit or literal meaning. You have to look a little bit just kind of like below the surface, right? Something that's a little bit more complex. And the nice thing about satire is you can earn sophistication a little bit easier. So in this case, we'll go over a couple of devices that are most common for satire, and then we'll use it to apply for an actual AP prompt, but also for a couple of readings I've chosen for today here. So for agenda, we're just going to consider the warm-up, a little bit of reading analysis, satirical device review. I'll just go through a list of them. Mistake last time, I gave a lot of new concepts and a lot of new terms for you guys, but the terms were largely isolated to the slides themselves. So on the document that you should have right now, all the terms are given there. And I'll make another list for the ones that we had on Monday, but otherwise, the luxury of today's lesson is also kind of like, it's more so review because these are terms that we've seen this year, some in 2A, so it's not like completely exotic and new, and so like, you know, we have to learn a completely new concept, right? So we'll go over those devices, and then later we'll apply it to a reading after we have those devices down and all that there. So we'll start with the warm-up real quick. It's really short, but I have a couple questions regarding that there. So on your sheet, I'm gonna have you look at that first warm-up part. There's a clip I wanna start with because it is sort of our jump into satire here. Title of this clip is If Google Was a Guy. And some of you might have seen this before, which is okay, you know what I mean? Like you can just analyze it once more, right? But otherwise, my questions for you, and we can just like free range answer these questions here, but a couple of questions I want you to kind of consider for these 3 points is, number one, what is the argument of the clip? So all clips that you ever see, all essays you ever read or whatever, there's always a central argument to it. So in this case, I want you to consider then, what is the author of this piece trying to convey or trying to deliver to us? Number two, who or what does it address? Every video or anything that you ever watch has a particular audience that is trying to criticize or is trying to propose a message to. So in this case, we're going to consider then who exactly or what subjects particularly is it trying to criticize this. And then lastly, we're going to consider then, how does this satirize? And if you don't remember the satire terms off the top of your head, that's okay. But otherwise, a more simple question perhaps is this: how does it poke fun at its subjects? In what ways does it do so? How does it portray? What are some things people say, for example, or just the content in itself? And again, some of you might have seen this before, which is again, okay, right? But otherwise, it's just our quick little jump back into satire and to kind of consider how to apply terms and so forth into this genre altogether. So I'll mute myself, we'll watch the clip here, and then about like 2 or 3 minutes to analyze and answer these questions, and we'll just free range it where you can answer any of them as we go along. So
next. Hello there.
Is today tomorrow New Zealand?
Yes.
Foot same length Europe.
What?
Inch same length Europe.
Gmail.com. What is Bitcoin?
Butthole. Gross, fat, butthole, dick, poop.
Is that what kids are into these days? Are your parents home?
Miss Pippi.
You mean Mississippi? Hey, I'm not a dictionary.
My grandson Nathan.
Song that goes meow 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 meow.
Girls' college.
Let's see. Right.
College girls. Nude.
Really?
Patrick Castles. Pat Castles. Pat Castles funny.
Bitcoin market value.
Weed amount legal NYC.
Patrick Castles funny writer, college humor.
Are you gonna do this all day?
What is prime meridian?
Head gog cute.
Do
You mean hedgehog?
Hedgehog cute.
God, do you mean hedgehog?
Hedgehog's cute.
Adderall Maxtos.
Yeah.
Adderall Maxtos, 165-pound man.
Okay.
Adderall Maxtos, 165-pound man, 20 years old. Adderall overdose signs.
Download Firefox.
Ever heard of Chrome?
How to buy Bitcoin.
Titanic drawing. Titanic movie drawing. Titanic movie drawing scene. Kate Winslet tits. Round 2.
Facebook.com, my grandson Nathan.
No.
Dexter based on real.
Free hamster.
Unbuy Bitcoin.
Boston Bomber.
It's a real tragedy.
Cute one.
Oh, fucking shit.
All right, and I'll put the link in the chat in case you need to revisit the clip here. But otherwise, I'll give us about 2 or 3 minutes to kind of like consider those questions here and to find examples within the things you immediately saw, but also the things that, you know, in reflection, you can kind of consider what the intentions were whatever the author was trying to say, basically. So give us about like 2 or 3 minutes and we'll just go through some volunteers here regarding this discussion. All right, folks, if you're still working on it, no worries, but that was about 2 minutes on my clock here. So I'm going to kind of open the floor for any of these sections here in terms of what is the argument of the clip, who or what does it address, how does it satirize, or just like in general, how does it poke fun as the 3 questions go along. So with document over here, let's do 1, 2, and 3, and we'll just kind of open the floor for anybody. Similarly as before, if you want to type your answer, go ahead, but if you raise your hand, go for it as well. Open the floor for now, for anybody. Okay, got a few that came in from the chat, so we're going to copy and paste Mohammed's over here. So first one here, how pointless the searches of Google are when it is a boundless source of information. We have the knowledge of the collective world in one search engine, but we only use it for simple things like spelling or porn. Absolutely. A lot of this video is kind of like our weird searches, and you could be looking up some really good information regarding like career or major or whatever, but we usually use it for nonsensical things here. Roger further adds in this one here, the video really shows that people today look for stuff that we do not really need to know. Absolutely. They choose what they want to see rather than what they could learn from Google, as it is one of the best sources for information. It's very like reflective of Muhammad's as well. But one thing that Roger puts in his response that's a little bit more nuanced is the fact that they choose what they want. So a lot of this is intentional, right? And it really reflects us as people, because it's not an accident that we looked up these things. Like that kid looked up what, like butthole dick poop or something like that, and that's something that he intentionally looked up. And so it shows a lot of who the base is that's using the internet altogether. Dylan further adds over here, people tend to use Google as a search engine that only needs a few key terms to find things, but often with intentions that are stupid in which they receive stupid results. Good point. So despite the fact that people might be looking up things that they want to, it might show that technology also kind of redirects us to ridiculous results, or our intentions aren't exactly met because of spelling or just broadness or whatever, right? Got another one from Anna over here where we got, based on the repetition of the dumb questions from being asked, technology Google seems to be used as just a joke rather than its intentions to finding info that is relevant. Absolutely. There seems to be that there is this big repetition of dumb questions that people don't just, ask one here and there. It seems like all of them, if anything. I mean, it's a little bit stereotypical, a little bit of a, generalization, but yeah, people do ask a lot of weird questions. Ivy adds on here, the clip addresses the effects of technology in a way showing that with these efficient internet networks, people have become lazy and incompetent to do things on their own, since they will always rely on Google for their answers. Absolutely. It seems to be that despite all this sort of information out here, it kind of has limited us to only look for mundane things, that this is sort of our norm ultimately. Brennan gives us another one here. He writes, the argument of this clip is the annoyance of human curiosity. We seem to desire certain information, and with this knowledge, we often tend to be erratic or very irrational. It also shows an addiction towards the media and the internet to search for our solutions, but our solutions tend to stem from abnormal thoughts and not mere research. Absolutely. It seems like a lot of our issues in life are more subconscious and pertinent only to us, and just kind of like, I mean, it exists online, I'd assume so, sure, but it's kind of like, so what, right? A lot of our inquiries are so what, and we get annoyed at that, where it's like, oh, this person's really looking at this stuff, seriously. And then later Zoran adds, since Google is a guy in the office, instead of instant searching, you have to wait in line for your turn and ashamedly hear the weird and inconsequential questions they ask. And this is good. What Zoran does here is kind of like, he's breaking down the choice that the video has done. So in this case, even though these are really good observations of what the entire video has as a central argument, thesis, right? What Zoran throws in here is kind of one of the choices they've done. It is a guy. It's literally a guy here who, to your own misfortune, you have to hear your dumbass questions being asked, right? Like, to have Mississippi thrown out, it's kind of like, ugh, really? I spelled it like that, you know what I mean? So it shows the stupidity one at a time. Dylan adds sort of a personal anecdote in this case. To give an example, Brooke Brandon said, often ask Mr. Todd what to do when the instructions are clearly written on the essay rubric. And so it seems to be that curiosity is not always rewarded. A lot of times, even though everything's like right in front of you, it's just kind of like, dude, you really need to look this up? Like, this should be common knowledge, right? So a lot of times, what's on Google is what we think people should all know, essentially, here. Samantha adds another one over here. For the video, Google utilized harsh language invectives. Good. To insult the people that uses Google idiotically. This is used to emphasize his anger and emotions among the various inquiry from the public. Yeah, and if you watch the later episodes too, he progressively gets angrier and angrier because people keep asking dumbass questions. And despite the fact that there is like, I don't know, because even like Google changes its layout based on a holiday, whatever. So on days of like scientific research or whatever, people still ask, questions that are, again, pertinent only to them. I think you'll be okay, Roger. Just make it as quick as possible, I guess. Anybody else on this video here, but more so on choice? I think he has some really good insight in terms of what the overall message is, but anybody else want to kind of throw in some of the choices they had from the video? And to push you a little bit, what about the people who are chosen? And Zoran kind of answers that question right here. So 12-year-old kid asking for booty hole pics, exposing kids going through puberty as their hormones develop into their discovery of porn. Absolutely. This is like again, it's a stereotype, it's a generalization, but it's kind of true. Like, kids look this stuff up. It's something of their, like, I don't know, maturing curiosity. Muhammad adds in, it makes fun of the frustration Google has to go through if it was a guy by answering dumbass questions. He holds hope when someone searches Boston Bomber, but then types cute, causing anger. And this is kind of that effect of satire, right? Where it's ironic, where you expect someone to finally give a good answer or a good research. It's like, oh man, this is a real serious issue. And then they add with something arbitrary there. So it's kind of like that setup where we expected something good and then it goes badly. Anyone else for any of those three questions there? RJ throws in, and I'll get you on in a second, Andre, after I post this one here. Whoa, text got small. Boom. RJ throws in, it shows the users who look up random incessant searches with nonsensical purposes. They convey a stereotype of a number of users, such as a kid looking at buttholes and seeing them as funny to a college frat boy finding pornographic material. It goes to show how our searches range from nonsensical to morally unbound. And I think you made some really good specific lookings at who's actually looking at those searches, right? Because the people who are looking up those things are usually categorized by those particular groups of people or types of people there. Again, we don't want to generalize like frat boys, for example, but it seems to be like the more chauvinistic group, or the one who's like more party heavy, I guess, just non-considerate of like people and their belief, stuff like that, you know what I mean? The insensitive types. Andre, go ahead. I saw a hand from you.
I feel like it also, rather than satirizing like the viewers, it satires the like actual Google. Like, if say, like, by creating Google as a person, like, we've all had those experiences where like you can't find something on Google, and then I feel like by making Google like such an angry person, I feel like it's so easy now to say, oh yeah, just like fuck Google, like it's just something that we can all like make fun of.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in terms of the choice here, because Google itself is just a search engine, so it's very impersonal and very like mechanical. So you can't really insult or whatever. But when you see it as a person, just like, look at this guy, like his anger, his annoyances, his everything. And so it's more like you can have a real human connection and almost sympathize with him, because he has to sit there basically and look at really bad questions from the world around him, right? So something to consider as well. Any last person want to go before we move on here? Yeah, Catherine, go ahead.
So I said it kind of shows how, like, on the internet, people do things that they usually wouldn't do, like, in real life, and how it kind of exposes that.
And I think that's one of the underlining messages of this particular piece here, because it's true. These are things that, I don't know, maybe the 12-year-old boy, maybe he'd go to his friends and be like, hey, dick, butthole, I don't know. But for the most part, most of the people here wouldn't want to say the stuff in real life, because again, they realize how dumb it is. And so Google, if anything, is really just our place to confide our deepest questions. Like, they did a survey years ago where, again, people look up medical issues for themselves to self-diagnose. People look up questions in terms of like identity and all that, just to get a little bit of validation from something that's, again, pretty impersonal here. Harsukman adds here, isn't he just doing customer service? People see it as a surface level job, but serves a critical role in keeping everything running. And I think that's the satire of it all too, right? Where it's boiled down to like customer service, but it does a great deal for all of us in terms of research and all that. And then Muhammad further asks, is this Horatian or Juvenalian? And if I had to categorize this, it's probably more on the Horatian side, where we're not attacking any side explicitly heavy, but it definitely is more playful. It's more just kind of like exposing foolishness, if anything else, right? But I think it's a good segue to our next slide over here. The things you said in the previous slide for everyone who contributed, those are really good observations as to answering those questions, but also to analyze the video itself. All we got to do now is kind of like add those terms into the actual repertoire that we have to analyze, and then we have rhetorical analysis done for satire pieces here. So things you could have said, for example, was the guy playing Google is a diminution of the entire search engine serving as one parody. We'll cover these terms again, no worries, but just kind of giving you an idea of how to use them, right? But as Mohammed asked, it is a Horatian satire, at least from my perspective, that it criticizes the stupid searches people often look up. Google guy throws invectives, someone mentioned that earlier, I think it was Sam. Clip utilizes many double entendre and innuendos to suggest like sexual natures of searches. And also each person's a caricature. Each person is a stereotype and they represent like a bigger demographic, or they, kind of just represent who would normally look up the questions in the way it is, right? So with that in mind, we're going to consider now a little bit of a lecture going back to some of the terms that exist in satire. And you have these terms in your sheet here, so if you need to go back to them, no worries. But I just want to go through them real quick again to review and also make sure we know all the terms once more. So we're going to go through Horatian going down to anachronism, this is a new one, but it's not complicated in terms of how it's being used because it's pretty apparent when you do see it here. Now, two things I want to consider before we even jump into discussion of satire overall. There's two purposes every time with satire. So whenever you get a satire piece on AP exam or for any work that you're dealing with, number one, you have to consider this, that satire generally utilizes humor, wit, exaggerations, and indirectness to improve humanity by criticizing its follies and foibles. And foibles basically means like its vices, its issues, right? But I think one of the big words to emphasize on here is indirectness, that a lot of works that are in satire are usually kind of like, hey, audience, I assume you're smart enough, figure it out yourself, because in figuring it out yourself, you gain the capacity to self-criticize, and you gain the sort of knowledge now to realize that the author is right. It's always nicer to have you solve it rather than me tell you in this case here. But at the same time, the function of satire is not to make others laugh at like persons or ideas they make fun of, but it intends to warn the public and to change people's opinions. So you've probably watched like PSAs in your life, public service announcements, things that warn you about the dangers of society, to change things, to like, not smoke or to be mindful of our environment or what have you. But satire does the same thing, just perhaps in a more humorous way, right? It's still a warning. It's still a way to change people's opinions. These authors are trying to basically change our opinions about corruption or conditions in society. So satire, despite its sort of like depressing nature, is usually trying to change for the better. Our segment, anti-smoking ads make me want to smoke more. Share those with me. So one quote I want to share with you real quick. This is a very old school, but one of the founders perhaps of modern satire, Voltaire. He says, if you want to know who controls you, look at who you are not allowed to criticize. All satire understands that everything is no bounds. Everyone is allowed to be criticized. Everything is allowed to be criticized. Because if something is saying, no, you can't criticize that, it is a controlling factor. And it might be limiting you in life then. Take, for example, politicians or rules that we have. If people say, no, you're not allowed to criticize that, there must be something that is being defended that is a little bit ulterior. For example, authors have in the past criticized slavery. Slavery is bad. People defend slavery, however. It suggests that there is something that exists in a particular group that, tries to hold back another group in this case here. So to kind of go into a quick review of all these devices and all that there, we're going to look back at Horatian versus Juvenalian just to clarify real quick these terms here. Horatian on the one hand is like more indulgent, amused, witty, overall more lighthearted humor, like the video we saw, right? It's more about like just looking at the obscurities of people. It's trying to create a sense of ridicule towards people. So it's more about like, haha, let's all laugh at this one particular subject together. But Juvenalian is usually harsh and critical. On the other end of the spectrum, we also have people who attack directly, evoking discontent. It's kind of like, I don't feel happy about this, and we shouldn't, and we should do it in a more, worrying way, a darker way, so that we all feel the urgency regarding it there. So Horatian is more about just kind of like us figuring it out on our own. Juvenalian is more about the author being more direct with us and telling us, no, we have to address this as an issue right now. Now, every form of satire has ironies. There's 3 different types of ironies that exist. So one of the dangers you want to be careful of in writing and using irony is that just saying irony by itself, readers sometimes would be a little bit confused of what you mean. Because again, there are 3 different types of ironies. So in the general sense, it basically is what appears to be happening on the surface level is quite different from what is actually occurring. In this case, we have verbal, situational, and dramatic. On the one hand, if someone is doing verbal irony, the literal meaning of written or spoken statements turns out to be the opposite. So we can think of it as sarcasm, for example. We can say it as a way where we thought they were going to say something, but then later they meant something else, right? Or if they do say something, but they mean something else. So this one's all about intentions. Verbal irony is all about intentions of meaning, usually for speech. Situational is more about expectation versus reality. Actually, a really good example from the video we saw earlier is the whole like Boston bomber thing, right? We're thinking like, oh, well, sad. Going to look up something that's more serious on the topic itself, but they mentioned cute one. So in this case, we see again expectations being blown out of proportions or thrown aside basically here. And lastly, dramatic exists more in plays. You don't see this too much in essays or whatever, but it still could exist here. It's basically situations in which the audience knows more about the situations, the causes of conflict here. And so an example of dramatic irony simply is like, I think everyone's read Romeo and Juliet, but basically in that situation there, it is a form of drama. And so we, the audience, know things more so than the characters themselves. We know that Juliet's not, really dead. We know that she is basically awaiting Romeo there. But in this case, because we know she is not really dead and Romeo thinks she's dead, the dramatic irony exists where it's like, oh man, he didn't know, right? So in this case, it's when the audience knows more than the characters being presented in this case here. We also have parodies where we take original aspects and works and exaggerate them, flip them to create like a comedic effect. So in this case, we take what we all basically have as common knowledge or as, Whack Arnold's is a good one from a class that we saw, the one that basically exaggerates how franchises, fast food franchises ruin usually disenfranchised communities, people who are in poor areas. We can watch it again later. I mean, it's a funny clip for sure. But in this case here, it kind of like plays on original work and takes that prior knowledge and flips it to make contrast or new focuses basically here. So in this picture here, we all know McDonald's, but in this case, by flipping it literally, taking the slogans and all that, we're now thinking like, well, actually the truth is McDonald's really is just one big like weight gaining program, right? Diminution is kind of a fun one. It's kind of like understatement basically, and it reduces the size of something to make it look ridiculous or for us to examine its faults up close. So in this case, we have this very big pandemic happening right here, but we have a leader who is more concerned about himself. So in this case, the picture here has him basically circling all the me's in this memo here regarding a speech on COVID-19, but he's supposed to be the leader. He's supposed to be the person who is in charge, who's supposed to be worried, who's supposed to have a plan. But really, by boiling it down, he's just a narcissist in this case. He is simply a person who's more concerned about his own interests and also him in an image sense. So diminution basically is taking things that are usually higher in scale or importance and boiling it down for what it really is. On the flip side, inflation is when you take the issue and you blow it out of proportion so that you can kind of, again, observe its flaws and its faults, right? In this literal image, the inflation has been inflated to be this big-ass boulder tied to this guy's leg, and it shows how inflation for an economy ruins people based on their meager income. And a little stick, kind of going back to the slide earlier, is diminution then. It's just like, looking at our income and like, oh man, our income really is a small little stick that we're holding on to before falling to our, ultimate doom here. Invectives we saw from the video as well, but invectives serve a couple of purposes. The first one is, just showing severe disapproval, making blame, but it's also to portray the people as crude, right? Where in this cartoon, if you see it, the guy's asking, do you think Americans are less civil these days? The guy says, fuck you, basically. And it shows, again, that Americans are crude and that they aren't civil in modern times. So invective sometimes, depending on who's saying it or circumstances, proves a point of author's intention there. Paronomasia, puns, are just wordplay, basically. It takes a lot of our prior knowledges and flips them on our heads, where we take concepts and titles and whatever, and basically makes fun of things that we know as a form of wit. It's cleverness. It's taking things that sound the same or things that we understand to be one way and then flipping it around. So in this picture here, we all know like that show you might have watched it because I haven't watched it either, but we have like Orange is the New Black, and they basically flipped it around where they meant the colors in terms of our presidents, right? We have Obama contrasting with Trump, and it's kind of like, that's not what we meant, but I can see what you're going with here because, you know, now we're all in jail, basically. We all feel like we're in jail. So that's kind of like the joke here being made. It's making a pun on the colors, on the presidents, on just our understanding of titles and all that there. This one is more on the dirty side. It's like innuendos and all that, double entendre. So basically it's when the author makes like word and phrase choices that are open to two different interpretations. They're usually dirty, risky, or inappropriate as a whole, but there's two reasons that an author might use double entendre. One is just the audience themselves are the ones who are basically forced to make the connection themselves, right? And it's kind of like, oh, shame on you. But at the same time, it's just to create humor in this case here, to kind of like defile or to make less sacred of a thing, to make these double entendres here. So some of you have inferred, and if you couldn't, on the bottom here it says happy birthday Playboy. Yeah, they basically made an ad that alludes or refers to breasts. It's all natural, just like Heinz ketchup. So whenever you are eating Heinz ketchup, you are eating a nice pair of, okay, next one. So caricature. So caricatures are basically hyperboles, but they're aimed towards people. So in this case, it's exaggerating on their stereotypes, their looks, and anything about their characters. If you look at the video we saw earlier with the whole Google with people asking questions, they're caricatures of the people who would usually ask those type of questions. The jock who would come in asking for porn, right? But otherwise, a lot of authors try to blow up situations to kind of expose or to show their perspective on the situation and to kind of reveal that it's maybe more so than it actually is. So it's another form of like inflation in this case here. Santa is not the nicest guy. He's actually a slave driver. Probably works for Amazon, you know what I mean? Got ambiguity. It's when an author utilizes a word with many different meanings, connotations, or intentions. And this is kind of like double entendre in some ways, where the word itself is open to interpretation. And the reason authors use ambiguity is sometimes there's no clear answer, and it actually says a lot more of when the audience thinks a particular word and the author actually meant a different word here. So really we're playing into the author's trap with ambiguity because it reveals a lot of how the audience then perceives a particular word or understanding in the context of the situation here. In sort of a comic strip example, Calvin over here, he says, lost my tiger Hobbs, and his mom says maybe you should describe him. And he writes on this sort of like human emotion level on the quiet side, somewhat peculiar, good companion in a weird sort of way. But she says, I mean, what does he look like? He says, oh. So it's sort of like the two different expectations, right? He thinks, well, I can describe him as a human, as a person to look for. But she's like, no, just what does he look like? And the word described then has ambiguity there. And so authors sometimes play with that. So it's another form of irony, contrasting our expectations there. And then I think there's the last one before we go into a little bit of application, anachronism. So those of you who play TFT or just League in general, I guess, you might know chrono as one of the builds here. And chrono is just Greek for time, actually. So that's kind of why that build exists, is because it is building on time and speed and so forth. But anachronism basically means against time. And so it's when authors juxtapose two different things with each other to make a point of either time period. Take the picture, for example, here. You have this like very Victorian looking woman over here looking at a man who's on his phone. And the guy is not like the most charming looking guy in the world. And so she looks at him, she says, my, what a fascinating man, how he stares rapturously into that electronic device. He must have a keen grasp of technology and so many more important things to do. And oh, you know, like it shows that like she's romanticizing him, that he is someone who is, you know, the epitome of a woman's expectations. But you look at him and it's like, no, that guy just looks like a regular dude who's just surfing his phone. So it makes two comments, actually. Number one is, she's a romantic author and she tries to put too much into what's not there. You know what I mean? She romanticizes the non-existent. But on the other hand, if you look at him and all the things that she's describing, it really makes this ironic expectation versus reality, right? That she says such a nonchalant posture suggests he is uncumbered by society's standards, showing that he's, you know, defiant, that he's against the times. And it's like, no, he's just slouching, you know what I mean? And the juxtaposition between these two is a form of anachronism, kind of commentary and criticizing both ways. And if you have all these terms down for the AP exam for satire in general, you're actually pretty good. Like if they throw you any satire piece and you use about like 3 or 4 of them, then you're good to go for the evidence section there. Just need to know, elaborate, and explain all together. So there are 2 different pieces we want to end off today to kind of practice here. The first one's actually an AP exam. They threw this back in, I believe, 2009. This one here is on environmentalists versus people who are more interested in business and all that there. So we're actually going to break this down piece by piece to put it all together to then answer the prompt here. So you have the readings on your sheets themselves. I'm going to kind of throw them one at a time. You can do it all at the same time if you'd like to, but we're going to work on this here piece by piece. So the first column here, the piece begins with the people first critic stereotypes the environmentalists. And if you don't know what people first means, it basically is people who put humans before the environment. So even though people are like, save the trees, people first would say, no, let's use the trees so humans can have tables and lumber and whatever. So in this piece, the people first are going to criticize the environmentalists. And my first question for us to kind of discuss and analyze is, how does the author satirize the environmentalists from the perspective of those who prefer people over nature? So in this case, I'm just going to have you look at the forms of satire that he uses from a point of view of someone who's criticizing those who are environmentalists here. So give you about 2 or so minutes. It's not a super long reading, and then we'll come together and find some answers together here. All right, that's about 2 minutes on my clock right there. So at this point, if you want to contribute a few of your findings of this piece, go ahead and do so. We're just looking for how does this author kind of satirize those who are these particular critics and all that there. So we're gonna start with wackos. Elaborate a little bit on that. What do you mean by wackos in this case here? No worries, no worries. Narcos? You want to elaborate a little bit more on that too, Hugh? And then Anna throws in caricature. You're absolutely right. Let's talk a little bit more about that as well. So I think some of these terms are definitely like correct in terms of what you're looking at, but then later do find sort of the examples or like what are you referencing here? What is being caricatured here in this case? So Zoran further elaborates with this one here. He says, calling them wackos because they probably care too much about the environment. As he says, they take things a little bit too far. And you're absolutely right. It seems to be like insults and whatever. So if that's the case, then what sort of devices can we throw for this particular observation then? Yeah, that seems to be like one of the oops, too much characterizations from the speaker, where they're basically criticizing them almost like, you know, these damn millennials are destroying businesses, and big business is sort of the thing to go. Muhammad adds it invective. You're absolutely right. And again, I challenge you to kind of like throw some examples at me here in terms of where you see that. Shayla sends over here, diminution of what environmentalists do and how it does not really help, looking at it closely to look at faults in their work, like destroying a whole house for a spider. So absolutely, it seems to be like environmentalists ultimately at the cornerstone of their work. They're not trying to do some big charity work for the world itself. They're more so of like, hey, I'm trying to ruin your land by fighting this spider here. So it really diminutes a particular environmentalist. And Ivy mentions invective as well, absolutely. Questions in terms of where that exists. And I think it goes with Zoran's point he mentioned earlier, like wackos. The author kind of uses the invectives of calling them a bunch of names and so forth there. Oh, okay, gotcha. Oops, keep going back. Anybody else for other things you noticed in this case here? There's a couple ones I want to dig out as well from the work here as well. Okay, let's see. Harsuckwood adds in for this one here. People are willing to accept help in this capitalistic society, take getting rid of spider for that one person. So in this case, it seems to be a push for capitalism then, that it seems to be that we would rather look for, what do you call it? It's sort of like on your own, right? I think I got that correctly. I mean, it's all one big troll kind of piece too. We're looking at satire here, so Anna throws in more on caricature here. She mentions environmentalists are identified as extremists or environmental wackos as a way to emphasize the exaggeration that they place to defend animal extinction, referring to Serial's example on destroying the whole house for a spider. Yeah, absolutely. That the overall invectives lead to this one big caricature of these crazy folks that people kind of invest too much into that. When he says, mind you, I'm all for the environment. I think so. It's a kind of concession. But obviously we know that he's not true in this case here, right? Because he says he's all for the environment, but nothing he says is really for the environment. So it's kind of like hypocrisy, if anything, in this case here. And then RJ mentions inflation in which they have a hidden agenda and then connecting it towards the left party, then going to how they want more government extensive power. Yeah, a lot of this is kind of like, you know, it's partisan, right? It's political, it's left versus right. So in this case here, they are connecting it towards a particular party here and making a caricature of that entire party altogether. Quinn further adds in, Parody uses new class to make fun of the Green New Deal because it deems the movement as a plan to take advantage of taxpayers. This would make sense in modern times, but Green New Deal is perhaps a little bit too, I mean, there have been like Green Deals in the past. So otherwise it does kind of like apply to this new class who is quote unquote trying to take advantage of taxpayer monies to, you know, operate on their own agenda and so forth here. Muhammad mentions a lot of logical fallacies and slippery slope, and you can definitely look at those as well because satire is 100% full of them as well. Any other persons on this one here? And if not, I want to throw one more, just kind of like see the choices the author makes on a textual level. If you look back at this piece here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the author writes, property owners know what's good for their own land. They care about the plants and animals living there. Let them work out conservation. They are the real grassroots in this country. And grassroots is sort of a ambiguous term because it has actually a couple meanings here. Grassroot can mean that you're a non-political, at least political affiliation, like a sort of individual group of activists. It can mean grassroots as in the literal image of grass and roots, you know, people who are working with these natural surroundings. They can also mention grassroots in this country as in the foundation. So in this case, the author utilizes this term because, again, they're talking about environment and all that. So they're looking at these choices of, you know, diction or phrases or what have you here. So another one here is the ambiguity of grassroots. Any other persons before we go to the next one here? If not, the next one's very similar. The flip side exists now, and in this situation, the environmentalists fire back. They don't take this sitting down. So in this next passage, the environmentalist stereotypes the people first critics. So in this one, my question is the same almost, where how does the speaker satirize the people first critics? And the question furthermore is from the perspective of those who believe in the importance of preserving nature, from their POV, right? So give you another 2 minutes for this one. Same process to look for, what do you call it? The next part here. It's not technically another reading. They're part of the same, but it's broken down to two different pieces. It's kind of like one side versus the other side. So give you another 2 minutes to break this one down, and we'll see what you can come up with this one. Okay, I'm joking. Like, this comes from 2009 AP exam. There's no way this went to Mr. Kong, like, can you go and get us excerpt of your work? You know what I mean? Like, what that's so obscure. But anyways, this is from the environmentalist point of view here. And so we're going to consider now the sort of choices they made to insult the other side or to fire back and so forth here. So open the floor once more again to others. to consider now what are some of the things that they did in this piece to satirize or to criticize and all that there. Go ahead. So Jaron starts us off with Caricature. He mentions portrays them as capitalists, that they only care for business. They keep their right-wing agenda hidden when downgrading climate change and species extinction, but for them, economic growth. And I think it's a good one here because he even gives sort of a specific situation that exists in the text here, the portrayal of capitalists and how they are usually right-wing or they have hidden agendas, so they're downgrading climate change, everything kind of portrayed there. Zoran mentions exposes the hypocrisy mentioned earlier. So yeah, it seems to be like a very back and forth, right? It kind of contradicts or counteracts everything that was said in the previous work, so that it is a big rebuttal ultimately in this case here. Anyone else in this one here? Any similarities to the previous one? Yeah, it's almost like you slap me, I slap you back, right? And it goes back to Anna saying here, calling names. So it's not maybe like full-on invectives, but it does kind of, yeah, and Jerry mentions it is like invective as well, right? Where maybe they're not using curse words and so forth, but they're also using like derogatory terms and they're insulting the other side's sort of ideologies and all that there. Any other choices that this group does? Tone between the two are similar. Can you elaborate more on that, Mohammed? I think you're absolutely right. Jerry mentions aggression. Sheila mentions in this answer here, double entendre of conservation. So author says conservation or conservative a few times in the piece altogether. And she writes, for environmentalists, it's conserving nature and the environment. Whereas for critics, it is conserving the beauty of golf courses by planting trees. Absolutely. So it's the question of what are you conservative for and what are you actually conserving? Muhammad further adds on how they both use their platform to attack one another instead of elaborating on what they are fighting for. Yeah, they never really kind of go into their own ideologies. They're more so of like, well, that's their ideology and that's wrong. So in this case, the tone is similar because it's aggression and it's also lacking of elaborating on personal ideologies. Any others for this one here? Well, another one you can also observe, actually this goes back to what you said, Mohammed, in terms of how they're very similar. Even on a structural level, they're actually very similar too, because if you look at the first one, they give this list of things like, you know, they're known as brown lashers or locally out west wise users. So kind of giving like this list of things over and over again. In the first one, they mention that they're Greens and Viros, environmental extremists. Zoran also mentions parodying the title because it's basically flipped with each other, right? So the two basically kind of play on each other here. And so the two are really the same overall. And they don't really get anything done and they make issues with each other. And the issue stagnates because they never really come to any sort of concession or any sort of closure. So the prompt's actually this for the AP exam. They ask you to consider the two passages below, both written by noted contemporary scientist Edward O. Wilson, appear in Wilson's book, the future of life. In the passages, Wilson satirizes the language of two groups that hold opposing attitudes about environmentalism. And they're going to ask you, read the passage carefully, then write an essay in which you analyze how Wilson's satire illustrates the unproductive nature of such discussions. And after observing both sides and how they insult each other and all that, now we can use the sort of findings we got from satire and thinking about that real question, right? What is it about this particular back and forth that is unproductive for discussion here? So we'll end with this one here. My last little bit we'll do is optional, but ending with this here, let's think about how we can kind of answer this prompt then. How do these two different groups, even though they're like really passionate about their side, how are they unproductive in discussion here? I'll give you about 2 more minutes in this case. With my example to start us off here, both parties spend more time making caricatures of each other rather than addressing their point. And if you can use the devices for usage, all the better. So give you about 2 minutes to kind of process this one, and we'll see how this is all basically one big unproductive discussion. All right, and that was about 2 minutes on my clock here, so we just kind of like finish our discussion regarding this question now with the prompt here. How does this satire then illustrate the unproductive nature of these types of discussions ultimately? Open the floor for anybody here, and we'll see in general, how is it all pretty much unproductive? So the first one, we got Shayla. I'm gonna copy and paste this one here. And we'll see what she got here. The two sides make diminutions of each other, more so to prove they are better people for their own reputation, other than with the intentions of arguing for what they actually believe. An example, I'm a better person than you because of this, versus I believe in this because it's the right thing to do. Absolutely. It seems to be that they keep trying to understate or diminish the other side, and so they try to boil down each other rather than talk about the things that they personally hold convictions for. And the author does a very clever job here of doing that for both sides, because ultimately he's boiling it down to kids fighting. It's just two kids basically saying like, I'm better than you. Like, no, you're not. You're bad because of this. And so it shows a squabbling of two different sides in this case. Anyone else for how is it unproductive to have discussion like this in the world of environment versus, I guess, business? Anyone else? And then Zoran puts in, both parties use an extensive amount of ad hominem as there's a back and forth squabbling. They are more focused on attacking each other, trying to one-up each other in a way rather than discussing the topic at hand. Yes, and if you put in like logical fallacies along with satire, because a lot of it exists there, you can also earn that point for sophistication because you know a little bit of, the logical fallacy terms in that case there. That would work. Anyone else? Andre, go ahead.
I feel like they make so many like generalizations of the other argument without offering any sort of evidence. For example, like they just say like this is what they want without like citing any source. Although it might be just common sense, I'd rather have like a logical fallacy is that like they don't have any concrete evidence.
And I agree with you there because if you're talking about something that's like very economic based or science based, there should be something, very, concrete about it. But there is nothing of that level. It's more about assumptions or characterizations, caricatures of the other side, generalizations altogether. Hamid furthermore adds, they both don't spend time talking about their side. When it comes to climate change, the environmentalists can talk about sea level rising, about the destruction of most seaside cities, how this problem affects everyone as a whole, and vice versa. But no, they name call and try to one-up each other in a game of roasting. Their arguments are weak and emotionally based. Absolutely, it's too pathos based, and that's a good observation to make as well, that these people were really operating off of emotions, when really the question is, well, what about all the studies that you have, all the sort of research that you have under your nose? Why don't you use any of that then? RJ further adds, both arguments convey this Juvenalian satire in which it shows how each side has its own hidden purpose and continues to inflate their arguments to the other by connecting them to political agendas, such as left and right-wing parties. Sure, you can argue that this is Juvenalian satire because it sort of shows in an invective way these two different parties that are basically angry, aggressive, and politically driven. You could even argue Horatian in this case because if Horatian is simply allowing us to see the follies and foibles of a group or groups, then this one kind of does the job, right? Author says nothing, just puts them out there, and we can see how dumb these two groups are in that way. Juvenalian could work in this case. I would even kind of argue it might be a little bit more leaning towards Horatian as well. Andre, is that hand up again, or is this a forgetting of? Oh, okay. Anyone else for this particular piece here? If not, good responses. These are things that you want to do for answering satire prompts, where you can first see the intentions of the work itself in looking at two different contrasting or points of views or voices or whatever, and then thinking about all the choices the author has made in portraying this particular point of view or product or person or what have you. And then you can kind of readdress the prompt then in thinking about, okay, I see how the author has been like satirizing all this stuff all together to basically prove the point that people are usually limited in their scope, or the author's trying to show the sort of stupidity that exists in society here. So in this case, satire is always kind of foolhardy, but it has sort of, again, that warning, right? Because Wilson in his piece is probably worried that we don't have actual progress for either side because we keep bickering between two sides here. So whenever you see a satire piece, always consider those two things in mind. Satire is always trying to change the world around you by exposing the stupidities of whatever people are doing or societies are doing or organizations are doing, what have you altogether. So with that in mind, I did want to end with one last piece, but this is a good place to stop because it's one of the earlier times to work with. The last piece you can kind of ponder yourself if you'd like to. It's a good short read. It's by Mark Twain, and Mark Twain is always a master of satire. Actually, there's a very good chance that if you're doing the AP exam and they choose satire, it comes from Mark Twain, just because he's kind of like the American face for early satire in general. But otherwise, he writes this piece called Advice to Little Girls. And it's funny because all his advice is kind of like, it's tricky. It makes it look like he's trying to tell girls to listen to society, but really what he's saying is, no, break free of societal expectations, take control and don't basically let the men control you. So in this case, advice to little girls is, actually really good advice, just throwing it in a satirical way. But the actual homework I want you to consider is on the last part of the page itself. So the homework in that small little piece here, just like what we did for the 2009 exam, I'm going to have you consider now the 2005 AP exam. It's another satire. And I'm going to have you identify 4 examples of satire being used in there. With those examples, see if you can apply the terms to them, whether it be Horatian or inflation or caricatures, what have you, because it's all going to usually apply to whatever piece you have. Or if you know the logical fallacies, to see what fallacies exist in the piece itself. But see if you can find at least 4, just some short examples and explanations. And then later, with that in mind, can you then answer the prompt with a thesis and all that there. I'll end class with that in mind, unless we want to go over the, the advice little girl piece here, which is fine with me as well. But at this point, any questions before we end?
I love you.
Okay.
Mr. Lin, the 2005 AP exam is the Mark Twain one?
No. The Mark Twain one is just an example for like practice. But I'm just saying that Mark Twain is usually, he's used often for AP stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's on there. But 2005 is just another form of satire, basically.
Wait,
is it going to be like on school or something?
Or is the homework 2005?
So I'll answer Andre's question first. The 2005 is in the drive already. It's just the reading itself. And then later, the advice to the little girl one, I'll make this one optional for classwork. And then later the homework will just be the 2005 one.
I did.
Other questions?
When's this homework due?
This one, we're on a Wednesday, and it's a little bit of a longer read. So kind of like last times, I think I put the due date to Friday. So you have some days to work on it.
Wait, it's a Friday? Like this Friday?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, class is over, unless we want to go over advice to little girls. A few people staying behind. That's cool with me if you want to go over this short piece here. See you later,
All right. Gotta go see Mr. Kong. Robin out.
Peace out. Can you turn in homework and class work late? Yes, but with a disclaimer that I do have due dates for these in a sense of like class to class. So usually I would give like 1% for your grade overall, but if it's late, I would just give half credit then. And for those of you who are heading out, I will see you on Monday.
Mr. Lin.
Hey.
You know how your homework
guys.
today was due at 1:30?
Yes.
I turned it in at like 1:40 accident. I forgot. So I lose.
10 minutes is fine.
I don't know. It was like 10, 15, or 20. I forgot.
It's okay. Don't worry about it. See you guys. If you have questions, feel free to stick around. But otherwise, Kevin. Oh, wait. Is that a mic? What?
Hello?
Alright, I'm about to take
Hello?
I'll see you guys later.
Peace
Hello,
out, peace
Mr.
out.
Lin?
Hey, what's up?
Oh, bye, Mr. Lin. I was just going to say bye.
Oh, see you, Devin.
Okay. Bye-bye.
See you.
Have a good one, Lin.
Peace out, peace out. See you, my friend. Mohammed, what's up?
What's your quarantine been like?
It's kind of like, I would assume it's no different from yours, where it's very like low activity, very boring for the most part, and it's almost like a janky summer where you don't want to do anything. But yeah, I mean, I hope you guys are otherwise doing all right. You know what I mean? Like, no big issues, no big psychosis. Okay, I don't blame you. But